Hello, hello. I apologize. I'm really late tonight. I was waiting for my cohort in Consciousness, Cara, to join us for Truth Bomb Tuesday, and they've had to leave their home and they've just returned back. So I guess I'm winging it alone again today. So I wanted to just really talk to fear, actually, and what this fire energy, with all the fires burning across the world, is here to teach us about letting the fire in our own belly rise up. So just take a moment with me, if you will, to just put your hand on your heart and notice the currents and the waves, the oceans, the streams, the lakes, the winds, all ebbing and flowing. And feel these tentacles, these ribbons of energy as they move. How does it feel in your body when you can sometimes see them from a subtle sense of sight? And notice and ask, where is the energy flowing in you? Can you feel where it moves, where it stops, or where it's perhaps stuck? And let's all do this together right now. Just close your eyes and notice the energy in your body, like it's a weather pattern. Maybe you're in the season of fire, where you're being asked to stretch outside of your edges of your comfort zone that actually are not comfortable. Or maybe it's the season of rain and you're inviting in the water element to bring all those emotions up to the surface so that you can actually deepen into what's underneath the layers of fear. And once you've assessed where you find yourself right now, choose a statement. Put a stake in the ground. Are you feeling sluggish or stuck? And if you are, invite in the energy to say, I choose, and give myself permission to allow these energies to move through me freely. I am in flow with life. I feel light. Or maybe you feel really, really heavy right now. Notice where your energy is rooted. And from that space, choose to connect. Choose to create your own safety. And if it feels light and right for you, bring that energy up and say, all is well. Thank you. And if you are finding yourself caught up into some kind of reactivity right now, maybe you're feeling depressed, maybe you're feeling pangs of sadness or waves of absolute terror, and maybe you're pendulating between the two, whatever it is, just look underneath all of that. Hi, Harrison and Granjan and Debbie and Kelly. And notice that underneath it is a fear that separates us from each other and our being and our mind. And giving yourself permission to pause, to get in touch with the body fear and the awareness of that sense of being so that it can expand and you can begin to really rediscover your true belonging through your own presence in life, and to how you love and how you're trusting your own intuition to follow your truth and look at what motivates and moves you toward what you really care about. And it's a little ironic, isn't it? Because our fear is really all about losing life. And yet by causing ourselves to be caught up in fear, we actually lose life. We lose our vital energy. There's anxiety that targets different things and different motivations that move us. But round the corner, there's a sense of, in any moment, something big is going to go wrong. This is the negativity bias that I spoke of a while ago. But just the origins of worry means to strangle. And if you're feeling fear and that somehow your life force is getting strangled, that there is this contraction that takes you away from wholeness and presence, what do you do with that? And I think one of the terms that I find really useful when we are afraid, when our mind is contracting into busy thoughts and our body gets tense and our mind gets tight, to look into the fear body, because it's part of you and it includes all the different parts of you. And when we are in this trance, in this fear trance, our body of fear is contracted. It's really that our world is seen through the lens and the world gets very, very small. So what I'd like to offer you tonight is to explore how we typically react when we get triggered and how we intensify this body of fear of the what if and the worst case scenario, and we go into reactivity, and how if we could just learn to push pause on the world and just slow down a little, that we can shift from this fight flight response to this place of rest and digest, or attend and befriend, and see this shift of fight flight, this kind of automatic reactivity, to attend and befriend as a sign of the evolution of your own consciousness, that you even have this capacity to recognize, oh wow, I'm in this fight flight pre-3-year-old, and I can identify with the fear of the child and deepen into the attention of holding this child to attend and befriend. So just know too that befriend doesn't mean that we are embracing with great love the fear that is there, because the very biochemistry of fear is not the same, but there is a movement toward this loving presence where we can attend and regard with compassion and gentleness toward it. So first, let's look at the function of fear as we know it, because it comes down to that lower rung of Maslow's theory, that is survival, and that is to anticipate what can harm us. And if fear wasn't there, you'd actually be brain dead. So it's a basic survival need to scan for threats and respond to them. And that most of our fears, because of the twists and turns of evolution, are not directly connected to physical survival anymore. Most of it's around the stories that we've created around our well-being and in the social context of belonging, and also around personal failure, or how I'm not going to be prepared, or how I'm going to fall short, or how I'm going to be rejected or abandoned, or that all hell's going to break loose. But it usually has to do with you and the way that you are dreaming into being your life and the big consequences that may happen. So if you just look underneath that and you really feel into fear, at the deep core level, there is this sense of the fragility of life, that every one of us is connected into this uncertainty. And it is true. It's uncertain and it's fragile. And it's the one thing you can be certain about is the uncertainty of it all. So looking at fear as an anticipation of this fragility. And if we can just begin to distinguish between our fear reaction that gets overdone or overridden, and then looking at the threat that you actually do need to respond to, the rational fear, that we end up living most of our moments in the awareness of the fear body. But there is a discrimination, and that is, do I really need to respond to this? Is it a real danger, or is this just a habit based on past experience? And did the worst things in your life ever actually happen? And looking at the negativity bias and the anticipation of what is going to go wrong in the most awful ways possible, that we create suffering because we're anticipating threats and we're responding to them as if they are real. And that we suffer because our sympathetic nervous system is locked into this fight-flight reaction, and we're just continuously looking at it through that lens. We're living in a very fearful, anxious mentality. So this is the fear body, and it becomes our identity. You can sense fear. How much of the time is there some sense of who I am as being in fear of what's going to go wrong, and the insecurity and the negativity bias and the social reactivity of the situations? How much of ourself is hinged and entangled in that? So then the inquiry becomes, what makes it so strong for so many of us is that it definitely gets amplified by the culture that we're in, where you can't read the newspaper or listen to or scroll Facebook without being triggered. That it's a very fear-based culture. And then you can sense also that it has to do with genetics and epigenetics, and upbringing is one of the biggest factors of an insecure upbringing. And I talk about this in the ACE study, where we didn't have healthy attachment with our parents, that there's a sense that there's something wrong with me and that everything's just going to keep going wrong, and it gets locked into your nervous system. So part of the inquiry is to recognize how we habitually react to fear, and look at what is your fear management strategy, because it's very useful to know it, because if you know it, then you can begin to push pause and move from your version of fight flight to attend and befriend, to rest and digest. But the first step is recognizing it, that if I think if anything, at least you may, from this conversation, be a little bit more interested when fear comes up. Because if you're curious, if you're not automatically tumbling into the reaction, in that interest, there is a pause. It's liminal space to deepen into attention rather than continue the fight, flight, freeze response. So interest and curiosity helps. So what are our strategies? Because we know the major ones, and one of them that isn't talked about as much as the freeze strategy is when we're feeling overwhelmed and powerless to effectively respond. And animals show us this. That's why zebras don't get ulcers. But if you go into fight, flight, what do we know about flight? How do we know about when we flee and pull back from the feelings of fear and the triggers of fear? How do we do that in our lives? And I go through this in depth in my Out of the Blues program. But I want you to just remember that, life as you find it, and I'm quoting Freud, is that life is too hard, that we can't dispense palliative measures, powerful deflection, which is the avoidant attachment, where you make your life a misery by ignoring it, or a substitute satisfaction, which is the ambivalent part, where we use substances to make us insensible to it, right? Where we just kind of bury our head in the sand like an ostrich, and we diminish it, or we numb it down, and then we can't feel any sensitivity. And I ask you, is it your management to deflect and ignore or not deal with it? Or do you step up and speak your truth? Because I think for most of us, in some way, what we're doing is a control strategy, right? We're trying to control things so that we don't have to deal with the unpleasantness or the discomfort or get away from what feels wrong. And one of my favorite stories is that one day, when you kind of find into being in a place of expansion and magic and abundance and manifestation is happening for you. I can't even get my words out because this is so deep right now. I'm still downloading this, but when you see death, when you look it in its face, and death is saying you can't escape, that you either lean into it or you resist it, but death will still be there. So instead of asking, how dare you, I want to encourage you to look at how can you actually surrender, fall into the grace and the trust of saying to yourself, I'm no longer going to defend a life that I'm not living. I'm going to choose to live into my legacy of truth and stand in my power. I was speaking to a client earlier today. She has been having some difficulties at work with a very manipulative, narcissistic boss. And for the first time, she actually stood up to her and she said, this isn't working for me. And she said it was like it fell on deaf ears because there was so much pushback because she'd actually said no more. And how terrifying it felt for her for the first time in her life to actually stand up for herself and say, this is not working for me. What else is possible here? And that old fear of patterns and pathways where maybe you have been a people pleaser, one that doesn't make waves, that backs down, that plays small just to keep the peace. How's it working for you? Not so much. Hi, Nari and Bud and Desi, Kaling. How are your boundaries impacting every area of your life? And what do you need to do to make it work for you, to create that win-win? And I think it's a beautiful topic to bring up as we sort of enter into the holidays. And I was going to say, check into the hospital because the boundaries are the impact that every area of your life, and if you weren't taught and modeled good functional boundaries growing up, or if you're in relationship with people who can't or don't respect your boundaries, then how you currently understand and hold your own personal boundaries may be very negatively or pervasively impacting your life, not to mention the life of your loved ones. And I think that's an important point to look at. How do I share my voice? I pulled a card earlier before I got on this when I was waiting for Cara. And it's really about coming out of the cave, honoring the places that you've been persecuted and using it as fuel to live into the truth, right? Truth has been is the theme for November. Allowing yourself the freedom of your own expression. And birthing into a new age. What are you dreaming or willed into being? Because as you get a sense of how big and nuanced a topic boundaries is and how much they impact your life, you stop resisting and you start responding to things in the best possible way, because boundary systems are invisible and very symbolic, like barriers or fences that have three purposes. One, to keep people from coming into your space and abusing you. Two, to keep you from going into the space of others and abusing them. And three, to give each of us a way to embody our sense of who am I being in this moment. So not only are we looking at internal and external boundaries across all categories and looking at them as dynamic, moving, living, breathing entities that have to constantly change depending on the context we find ourselves in during the day. Not only that, but we're also responsible for not only knowing and holding our own good functional boundaries, but also responsible for sensing and respecting and not violating the boundaries of others. I always say, don't make anybody wrong, don't defend your point of view, and don't put barriers up. So you're getting a sense of how big and nuanced a topic boundaries are, and how fear plays into it, because you've been training for lifetimes. This is the age of the light. We talked about this on Sunday on the 1111 master energies with my cohorts in consciousness. But looking at what are good boundaries versus poor boundaries. Hi, Violet. Nice to see ya. So how are you going to stand up for yourself when you feel yourself being shamed or criticized or asking that the other person treat you more respectfully, and they can't even hear you because they're so entangled in their own fear of being abandoned or rejected or being found out as a fraud, right? The jokester, trickster, prankster energy. And that was my dog agreeing. So how can you manage your own anxiety without lashing out at your partner to release your own emotional pain? Because you're respecting the emotional boundaries of the other person by taking responsibility for your own feelings. And as I said to my client today, when you actually go, I'm sorry, could you help me? I'm a little bit confused here. If you were in my situation, what would you do differently? That's a win-win situation of right relationship and open communication, because spiritual and intellectual boundaries are additional examples of internal boundaries, meaning they involve data or input from inside ourselves or from other sources that we either allow or process or block internally according to what we feel comfortable with. So when you're not trusting your own sense of spirituality or your own truth or your own stand, what matters and means something to you, if you're ignoring your own spiritual boundaries, or maybe you're lying to your partner or even gaslighting them into believing something that they sense isn't true, you're violating that intellectual boundary of another person by insisting your reality is truth and theirs isn't. And again, I think this is what this fire energy that is so prevalent on the planet right now and has been for the last year is saying, burn up everything that no longer serves you. And look at how are you honoring your own values and beliefs around this time, the holidays that are coming, instead of buying into what somebody else thinks should be so. So admitting when you don't know a fact or a figure to your other or in a business relationship, and being willing to tap into cosmic Google to see, is this a place where I'm respecting the intellectual boundary of somebody else by not falsifying information, not trying to manipulating them into giving you what you want, and moving from there to create a win-win situation. So remember, the reality with boundaries, and I didn't even know we were going to go off on this tangent tonight, but it seems that we are, is to educate yourself further about boundaries. Check out the list of resources that I provide in my YouTube channel, on my SoundCloud account, on these Facebook Lives. and familiarize yourself with what your boundaries are and how they show up in your lives and what they might look like for you. Because we're always looking for a win-win situation. And as highly sensitive beings, a lot of you back away from that. So how can you experience something different in relationship? Because in my experience, there's no better way of relearning good functional boundaries than to be in right relationship with someone who can both model this for you and who can also respect your own boundaries. So if you have friends and loved ones in your life who can't do that, great. But for those of you who don't, and even for those of you who do, I really, really, truly hope that you get this. Because when you can start to imagine your own patterns of boundaries and allow them to develop, and it may take some time to relearn and practice something different, but if you're interested and curious about how to improve your boundaries and reset your nervous system and grow your child parts up, then just say, yes, I'm ready. Yes, I'm committed, because I'd love to work with you and help model good boundaries and assist you in learning what's possible in a place of healthy, right relationship. So what are you learning or not learning right now about boundaries? Hi, Mariette. That's growing up in your family or in your business dynamics? Is there a type of boundary that feels hard for you to understand and set? And can you share an example of how you personally learned to set better boundaries for yourself, even if you're terrified? That's my invitation to you. Use this fire energy where we're burning away the erroneous debris, the positional heat pad. So anywhere where you've taken a position that you cannot change, choose, or institute a different way of being, you handicap, entropy, paralyze, atrophy, and destroy yourself in keeping that lie in place. That's what a positional heat pad is. Somewhere where you've taken a position, and it's kind of like a conclusion or getting an answer, rather than just asking questions that expand the infinite possibilities that are available to you. When you come to a conclusion, nothing greater than that can ever exist in your reality. So, are you willing to let all of that burn in the fire and return it to the earth for recycling so that you can plant better seeds of consciousness? Letting you get that fire in your belly stirred up. Exactly, Mariette, to be positive. And you have to believe it. Nothing to hide, nothing to prove. But to just be in the energy of the fire element that's saying everything that comes to earth goes back to the earth. And we are part of that. We're part of the earth. And when we start to recognize and acknowledge that we have an important part to play in the regeneration of the earth, in humanity, then anything is possible. So don't buy anything as more important than you. See everything as just an interesting point of view, and allow yourself to expand out with that eagle energy that came through in the reading for the week. See everything from a bird's eye perspective and ask yourself, what do I have to lose by letting fear be bigger than me? And I'm going to have a lot more. There's some beautiful, rich, juicy conversations coming out by a meeting with two amazing thought leaders this Friday for Feature Friday. I hope you join us. We're going to be talking about how to create right relationship. And then at the end of the month, I have Adi Kanda, who is one of my cohorts in fear release, trauma release, joining me at the end of the month. So lean into fear. Ask fear what it wants to teach you. And trust that the universe has your back. You have everything that you need right now. Beyond a doubt. You are supported, and it is time to illuminate the truth of who you're being. And I'm here in honoring of your gifts and your capacities and your talents. So stay with me. I've got some exciting stuff coming up for you, and speak to the truth of what's calling you right now. And please post in the comments and ask me questions about this, because without you, I'd be stuck in my own paralysis and fear as well. So trust in that, and allow yourself to move into a new paradigm of truth-telling and return to trust, because without trust, you have nothing. I see you. I honor you. I love you. Have a beautiful rest of the week. Namaste.